Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. All right, today we're going to be taking it back to the 1930s, back to the Depression era when the Midwest of the United States was under assault by Mother Nature and gangs of bank robbers, kidnappers, and killers. Many of them have become legendary. While John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, and Bonnie and Clyde got the majority of headlines throughout 1933 and 1934, on June 17, 1933, the name that dominated the front pages across America was Frank Jelly Nash. Frank Nash was born on February 6, 1887 in Birdseye, Du Bois County, Indiana, to John and Alta Nash. He was the third of six born to the relatively middle-class couple and was given the family nickname Jelly Bean. Frank's father owned a few hotels in Indiana and Oklahoma, and sometime in his youth, Frank's father moved the family to Lawton, Oklahoma, where he operated a hotel and was known around town as a good man. Frank was a good student in school. He was always polite and well-mannered, but he had a restless spirit. He worked for his father for a while at the hotel, and when he turned 18, he joined the Army. When he returned, he was no longer content with the small-town Oklahoma life. He needed some adventure. Oklahoma at the turn of the century was still the Wild West. Thieves still used horses to make getaways, and sheriffs still put together posses to hunt them down. Despite the risk, Frank decided that the bandit life was for him. He teamed up with a gang of safecrackers, and they began to steal everything they could. March of 1910, he and his gang cracked the safe at Cracker Brothers store in Lawton. This was one of a rash of burglaries that broke out in the area, and the cops were taking notice. On March 5th, acting on the tip, the police found the gang's burglary tools stashed under the Flats building. They left the tools in place and staked out the building. On April 29th, Frank Nash and John Murphy came to retrieve the tools. The cops jumped out as soon as they had them in hand. Both men ran. Frank tried to run behind a plank of wood, but the officer pulled his weapon and shots rang out. The bullet was slowed by the wood plank, but still lodged in Nash's shoulder. He surrendered and was arrested. Murphy was able to escape, but was arrested in a theater not far away. Nash was charged with possessing burglary tools and was given a $1,000 bail, which he paid and was released. One of the gang, Nolly Humpy Wortman, was arrested for the cracker job and did not like the fact that he was the only one facing justice. He told the cops a few things, and Frank and Guy Huber were arrested and charged with burglary. Again, he bonded out. This time he skipped town. When he returned to Lawton in December, he was arrested and found guilty of possessing burglary tools and sentenced to 2 years in jail. But his sentence was commuted. But he still had the cracker charge hanging over his head. But eventually, that whole case would be thrown out in March of 1912 due to a procedure error. Nash and Huber were free, and Humpy Wortman left town. On March 4th, 1913, Wortman came back to Lawton to visit his family. Frank and Guy Huber found out about his return and paid him a visit. The pair greeted Wortman like old buddies. They asked him where he'd been and how long he was staying. Wortman told him he was only in town for a few days and he was going to leave. Huber told Wortman that he and Nash had stolen some silks and they wanted him to see him before he left. Later that night, Wortman was in the pool room when Huber came in. He didn't speak to Wortman. He just tipped his hat, which was code for him to come outside. Then he tugged on his coat, which meant not right away. Wortman waited a few minutes and then he went outside. Huber told him that the silks were just down the train tracks a half a mile away. When they got half the way, they were met by Nash. The trio walked down the train tracks and Nash told him it was too soon to get the silks. Wortman said that he was tired and suggested that they sit down while they waited. They made their way to a freshly plowed field and sat in a circle. The next thing he knew, Wortman was standing up. His head was hurting, it was bleeding and he couldn't see. He called out for Nash and Huber, but no one responded. He was found around midnight, wandering aimlessly by two men and taken to the hospital. He had been shot through the right temple and the bullet exited his left eye. He remained unconscious in the hospital for a few days. When he came to, he refused to say who shot him. At first. But eventually he told the cops that it was Nash who did the deed. Nash and Huber were arrested. At first, Wortman looked like he was going to make a full recovery, except for the fact that he would be blind in one eye. He was released from the hospital and took a trip to Texas. When he returned, he began to run a fever and went into convulsions. He was rushed to the hospital and a surgery to remove a blood clot in his head was unsuccessful. Nash and Huber were charged with murder, found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. In 1918, Frank petitioned to be released to fight in World War I. His sentence was reduced. He enlisted and was shipped over to France. When the war was over, he came home a free man. A year later, he returned from Europe and used his explosive expertise to blow a few safes. One of them was the Corn State Bank in Grady County, Oklahoma. Wanted posters were issued for him, and he was hunted by a posse of sworn-in deputies. He and a partner were captured, and he was sentenced to 25 years for using explosives during the robbery. In jail, he would become a trustee and a model inmate. He was released in 1922 after having his sentence reduced to 5 years. Frank Nash was the type of man who only behaved when forced to, and soon he was running with a gang of thieves run by the notorious Al Spencer. Al Spencer was an old-fashioned bank robber. He had been at it since 1906. Spencer and his gang terrorized Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas throughout 1922 and 23. On August 21, 1923, the gang, including Frank Nash, robbed a train in Katy, Oklahoma. During the robbery, Frank struck a postal worker who refused to comply. All the witnesses said that it was the notorious Spencer gang who pulled off the heist. $10,000 was placed on the heads of Spencer and his gang. Al Spencer kept one step ahead of the law until September 23rd, when he was killed in a shootout with a posse sent to capture him. Frank Nash will be captured on October 5th, given a bond, and immediately ran off to Mexico. He was arrested in Texas after he was lured back across the border. When a cop pulled the gun on Frank, he said, "Gentlemen, I've kept you waiting. If I have, I'm regretful indeed, and would have come across sooner had I known of it." On March 3, 1924, Frank will be sentenced to 25 years in Leavenworth Prison for assaulting a postal employee. Again, he gained the trust of the wardens and the staff and was a model prisoner. So in August of 1930, at the age of 42, Frank was given a job as the trustee and was assigned to Deputy Warden F.L. Morrison's residence. On October 19, 1930, Frank was alone on the property and he ran off. His absence was noted around 7 p.m. and a search party was put together, but Frank was in the wind, and with some help, he made his way to Chicago, where he connected with some old pals and opened a joint, as he called it, with beer, food, and slot machines. He got himself married, and he and his new bride blended in with the rest of the tough guys in Chicago. This was the height of the Depression, and the gangsters and the outlaw bank robbers became celebrities that were cheered on. Frank Nash joined another gang of bank robbers, which included Harvey Bailey, Vern Miller, and Charles Arthur Floyd, better known as Pretty Boy. The gang would commit several bank robberies throughout the Midwest over the next few months. Again, Frank was being pursued by the law, but this time it was the FBI, run by J. Edgar Hoover, and Special Agent Melvin Purvis was put in charge of capturing Pretty Boy Floyd, John Dillinger, and the rest. On December 11, 1931, Frank Nash went back to Leavenworth. He wasn't surrendering. He was there to aid in the escape of 6 inmates. During the escape, the stolen car containing the inmates blew a tire. The inmates tried to steal a car from a group of teens who passed by. When the escapees tried to force the warden to the car, he fought and tried to run. He was shot with a shotgun in the shoulder for his troubles, but he would survive. In the spring of 1932, Harvey Bailey was arrested on the golf course with Thomas Holden and Francis Keating. Nash was there too, but he was able to escape. He headed to Arkansas to lay low. In Hot Springs, he gave his name as Doc Williams, and he spent his evenings in the nightclubs and was known to be a generous tipper. The FBI had information from a man named Otto Reed, the chief of police of McAlester, Oklahoma, that Nash was in Hot Springs, and agents Frank Smith and Frank Lacey were sent there to bring him in. Nash and his wife were staying in Hot Springs with several of his new gang while they planned their next robberies. The agents shadowed Nash for days. His friends were some dangerous men, and they waited for the opportunity to catch him alone to avoid a shootout. On June 16th, Frank went into a cigar shop on Central Avenue to buy a cigar. 3 men walked into the store behind him and purchased cigars. Then they drew their revolvers and surrounded Nash. Officer Frank Smith pushed his gun into Nash's belly and said, "Put the beer down and get in that car." Nash complied and was forced into a waiting car. When the car sped away, the many witnesses thought it was a kidnapping, and the police received calls that someone had been taken for a ride. Calls went out to neighboring cities to be on the lookout. The car was stopped in Benton, Arkansas, but the officers let them go after being told the situation. The agents drove to Fort Smith, Arkansas, where they boarded a train to Kansas City. The plan was to get Nash to the Union Station in Kansas City and take him back to Leavenworth. Frank Smith called FBI agent Reed Viterli, in charge of the Kansas City office, and told him to get a group of men together and meet him at the Union Station the next morning. Back in Hot Springs, Frank's wife found out that he was arrested. She contacted the gang and told them what happened. Frank had helped a few of them escape prison, and it was time to pay him back. So a plan was hatched to free Frank Jelly Nash from the law. They assumed that he would be taken to Kansas City for transport, so a member named Adam Richetti, along with Pretty Boy Floyd and Vern Miller, were recruited to free Nash. At 7:15 a.m. on June 17, 1933, the train containing Frank Nash pulled into the Union Station in Kansas City. They were met by Special Agents Reed Viterli, FBI Special Agent Raymond J. Caffrey, and 2 Kansas City police officers, W.J. Grooms and Frank Hermanson. The plan was to drive Frank Nash to 34 miles from Kansas City to Leavenworth under heavy guard. Frank had spent the train ride in handcuffs and heavy shackles around his ankles. After making sure the path was clear, the 8 men made their way to the 2 cars waiting in the parking lot. Agent Lackey and Chief Reed were armed with shotguns and the rest with pistols, but the heavy weaponry was in the car. Outside, 4 men had driven up. Adam Ricchetti, Vern Miller, and Pretty Boy Floyd got out and took up position between some cars feet away from the agent's cars. Nash was to ride with Agent Caffrey in his Plymouth. He was placed momentarily in the driver's seat while the back seat was loaded, and he was to slide over when the folding passenger seat was pushed back. Officers Hermanson and Groom were standing on the west side of the car by the front. Just then, 2 men jumped out from behind nearby cars with Thompson submachine guns and said, "Get him up." And then shots rang out. One of the men opened a Thompson submachine gun only 2 feet away from the officer. Officers Hermanson and Groom dropped to the ground dead. Another shooter appeared and they sprayed the car. When the firing stopped, the men peeked into the car and one of them said, "Oh hell, they're all dead in there. Let's get out of here." 2 of the men jumped onto the running board of a car that pulled up. As they pulled off, a motorcycle cop responded to the shooting and took aim. He hit one of the men as he ran away. The man stumbled but regained his feet and was able to make his escape. When the smoke cleared, 5 people lay dead. Special Agent Raymond J. Caffrey, Police Chief Otto Reed, Detective Frank Hermanson, Detective W.J. Grooms, and Frank Jelly Nash. All of the men died of head wounds. Agent F.J. Lackey was shot 3 times in the back and was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Agent Viterli received a shoulder wound, and Agent Frank Smith was unharmed. His response when asked about it was, "I guess it wasn't my time." Pretty Boy Floyd will be identified as the man who was shot trying to escape. Ricchetti and Miller's pictures were picked out when shown to witnesses by the FBI. FBI put out wanted posters and placed bounties on all 3 men. Vern Miller's body will be found in the ditch outside of Detroit in December of 1933 after he got into a fight and shot a man in Longie's Wilman's operation. Floyd and Ricchetti stayed on the run together, and on October 20th, 1934, they were noticed in Ohio. Ricchetti will be captured after a gunfight. Floyd would get away, but will be killed 2 days later in a cornfield in Ohio by Special Agent Melvin Purvis. Adam Ricchetti will be the only man to stand trial for the murders. He will be found guilty and sentenced to death. He died in Missouri's gas chamber on October 7, 1938. And that, my friends, is the skinny on Frank Jelly Nash. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. Hope you learned some things about the Kansas City Massacre you didn't know. All right, so you know by now, break that thumb, bump off that subscribe button, ring that bell, set it for all notifications so you don't miss nothing. If you want to slide an envelope upstairs to the boss, the PayPal link is down below. Christmas is coming up. If you want to get your guy something nice, your girl something nice, or your family, anybody in your family something nice, go down to the merch store, purchase a Few Bad Men t-shirt, a Shots Ring Out t-shirt. They make a great gift. If I can, I'll do a Black Friday sale. So this video is going to come out before Thanksgiving and before Black Friday. So look down in the merch store. I have to check and see if I can do a Black Friday sale. So I hope everybody has a good turkey day. Eat some good food. Have a good time with your family. All right? So listen, this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I'll see you in the funnies.